here to talk about a crisis. Let me tell you about a crisis that I was involved in earlier this summer. It was 6 o'clock, Friday evening, before a bank holiday. My son, who's 5, was there. His friend, who's 5, was there. His friend's brother, who's 3, was there. And the mum was there, and we were drinking wine. Okay, 6 o'clock, bank holiday. And I got a phone call from a PR that I am involved in, and she said, "Oh, Anne, you do crisis communications, don't you?" And I'm looking around thinking, oh my God. And so I said, yes, okay. And she said, somebody's going to ring you in 5 minutes. It's one of my clients. He's had this terrible email. So I tried to kind of shoo everybody out, but he rang before they were all out. So I had to say, can you call me back in 5 minutes? And basically what happened is this man ran a training company, and he'd had an email from, he'd had an anonymous email. Basically, it was about 5 pages of totally malicious, libelous, awful allegations about his company. And he'd sent it to whoever had sent it, the anonymous person, had sent it to all his clients, all his kind of stakeholders, because he had government contracts, all his, and also to the Observer and various other newspapers. And if this had got out, if somebody had followed up the story, which thank God they didn't, that would have been the end of his business, basically. And he was very lucky because this was only sent out on email. It wasn't sent out on social media. But nowadays, that could very easily have happened. And if it had been on Facebook or Twitter or something, that would have been, we were able to contain it because we were able to craft a response. We had time to work out what the rights and wrongs of this were and craft crisis communications, key messages, because it wasn't in the public domain. But if it was on Facebook or Twitter, he'd have been potentially stuffed, and that would have been the end of his business. So that was an old-fashioned crisis, but it could be a very modern crisis nowadays. So what I want to talk to you about is, first of all, I should tell you about my experience. Obviously, I was in the media for 25 years, and I was in print, and I did quite a lot of investigative journalism when I was in print. And then I was in TV, and I spent 14 years working as a producer. And that included quite a lot of time doing undercover work, going into businesses with microphones and secret hidden cameras and that kind of stuff. So I know about how businesses get into crises, and therefore also what journalists are thinking about when they're kind of covering stories when things have gone wrong. And the problem with social media is if anything goes wrong in your business now, you are much more exposed to journalists, and it can just blow up into, out of all proportion. So what I want to do is give you some insight about how journalism works and how crises can develop and what to sort of do to contain them, basically. So first of all, can anybody come up with an idea of something that might be a crisis for their business? Just a couple of ideas.
Well, my website's good.
What does your business do?
I look after people's plans, blogs, etc.
So that would be a real problem, yes.
If the blog went down, then
You'd be stuffed. Anybody else?
If a client is unhappy with the amount of time it's taken you to come back to them because you forgot to tell them you're on holiday, and they tweet,
Yes.
or they stick a person or something on your Facebook page,
Yeah.
where is my photography album or something.
Yeah. Anybody else?
I'm Ronnie Wood, and I'm having an affair with my ex-wife's daughter.
You are Ronnie Wood, are you? You've changed. Pardon?
We're winemakers. A bottle of wine that somebody thinks isn't up to scratch, and they tweet it.
Yeah, and I mean, in the past, one dodgy bottle of wine would have been just you and them. A photos, not delivered on time, that would have been a phone call, maybe a nasty email. Now it's all completely different. I've just got some other things which might be crises. Angry employee, which is actually what the training company had. Somebody basically gets something out there, and instead of just complaining to you or being pissed off down the pub, now they put it all over Facebook. Their wife puts it all over Facebook. Their girlfriend puts it all over Facebook. Somebody who's spoken down the pub puts it on Facebook. And anything, somebody's a bit pissed off, suddenly it's out there all over the place. Staff sickness. Now, this sounds a bit silly, but if you can't deliver your service because somebody is sick, then, you know, if I hadn't been able to come here because my son was sick, for example, you could have been tweeting, God, I really wanted to hear that crisis comms talk, but, you know, they haven't turned up. And that could reflect badly on my business. And that can be the same for all of you. If you can't deliver your service, nowadays, somebody puts something on Facebook and it's a whole different ball game. Mistakes. Everybody knows mistakes happen. And also, within this is not just mistakes, but malicious things or things where something goes wrong because you've got a member of staff who isn't what they might seem. So I'm thinking particularly of a nursery, for example. There's been quite a few high-profile cases recently of nurseries where they have staff that don't behave in the way they really should if they're working in a nursery. Those kind of things can cause huge, huge fallout. And in the past, obviously, that would have been a small contained problem. Nowadays, it's all over the place because of social media. And finally, kind of acts of God. Everybody knows that, you know, the weather might interrupt your supplies, it might interrupt you supplying your clients, it might mean that you can't get to something you're meant to be at, it might be a strike, it might be anything. All of those things have been changed by social media completely. And they can happen to anybody. They're not just for big businesses, the Toyotas and the BPs and the BBCs and the News of the World and all those things. They're not just for that. It's for everybody who can experience these problems. So I'm sure you all know this, how social media has changed the game. It's free, so everybody can use it. Everybody can see it. There's open access. It's public, which is kind of the same thing. It's instantaneous. So it's not just, you know, somebody complains and they write a letter to the newspaper and it's a week. It's there now within seconds of something going wrong. And you can't control it. There's nothing you can do to stop people posting bad stuff. So it's basically everything is public and it's quite scary, really. So it's also changed how the media works because it's changed journalism. And so, as well as being public to everybody, journalists use social media, and it's made us all citizen journalists. So look at Syria, for example, where people were reporting what was going on in Syria, and everybody knew, and everybody was a journalist. A plane crashes, people are sending in their photos and sending in their videos, taking a little video and emailing their photos or tweeting their photos. Suddenly, we can all become journalists. And news often now breaks first on Twitter. So instead of scanning the BBC website or the Sky News website or whatever it might be, people look at Twitter. I look at Twitter now to find out what's going on. I'll ring my husband up who works at Sky and say, Ged, did you know this has happened? Because I've seen it on Twitter, on the Twitter feed. I, obviously, being a journalist, I follow lots of kind of news sites. So news often breaks first on Twitter, and journalists use Twitter. So look, we've got, oh no, it's not come up. We've got a couple there, Robert Peston, John Snow. I just did a short search, journalist Twitter. They're all on there, basically. Everybody's on there. They use it now to promote their stories, but they also use it to search for stories. And so they monitor it. So if there is something going wrong in a business or wrong in your sector, they will be looking and they'll be searching. And if you are going through a fairly high-profile crisis of some sort, they'll be looking on Twitter to see what people are saying about it. So it is actually much more of a problem for people if you've got something going wrong, because it's out there so much more. So, ticking time bomb. Basically, you can't control what's posted. It's a forum for people to complain about you. But bad news can go viral. It can go all over the place. One organisation that found this to their cost, or two organisations just in the last week, British Gas and Ryanair, both had Twitter chats with their bosses. I don't know if any of you saw anything about this, but Ryanair particularly, basically everybody complained all over the place about what was being, about the service from British Gas. They put some prices up, and also Ryanair, clearly, obviously, you all know what they were complaining about. And Michael O'Leary, the boss of Ryanair, was responding by being really rude. So he was being sexist, he was abusing people, and the poor old comms team, who were probably thinking, this is going to be a great, we're going to be in touch with our customers, all that kind of stuff. It was all, this story was in the Independent, it was in Sky, it was on Guardian, it was all over the place. So real kind of a real sort of shot them in the foot. But while it can also be a bad thing, it can also be a really good thing, because you can use social media to your advantage. So basically it's a really easy way of communicating with your customers and your stakeholders. You can get to your customers very easily. For example, one of our clients is the Associated Board of the Royal Schools of Music, and not that long ago, well, last year, so quite a long time, when there was snow, they had to cancel lots of exams. What they said to all the exam centres and all the music teachers was, we will keep you updated on Twitter with what is going on where. So instead of having to email every music teacher all over the country saying your exam is going on, your exam is not going on, basically they just said follow us on Twitter, and all the updates were on Twitter so everybody could see. So it's a really easy way of them telling everybody what was going on. And information goes everywhere, so everybody can read it, which is also a very good thing, because you're not confining it to just your customers. Everyone can see how you're dealing with your crisis. It's immediate. You're not waiting for anybody else to convey your news. You can get it out there as soon as you know what you're doing about something. As soon as you're trying to deal with something, it's out there, and it's under your control. So you are in control of your message, nobody else is. So the big message I would like to give you is, you can't just let this happen. You have to prepare for a crisis, and you can't just be sort of thinking, oh my God, I need to be on social media to deal with this, when you're in the midst of something going wrong. So basically, you must have a social media policy, and that policy essentially must cover who can tweet, what they can tweet, what hashtags you might have in the event of a crisis. All your staff should be signed up to it, so it will control what they can say, when and how, and it should also forbid leaks. So if there is something bad going on, you don't want your staff to be going home and saying, actually putting on Facebook, my God, it was a really awful day at work today because this had happened. That your policy must cover that kind of stuff. And you must have all your accounts basically set up before you start, so that you're not, the last thing you want to be doing in the midst of a crisis is going, oh my God, we haven't got a Facebook page. Oh my God, we've got to set up a profile for Twitter. You need to be active before, so that should something happen, you've already got you can just say, right, this is our crisis comms strategy that we've got planned, and we're all ready to go, basically. So crisis comms strategy, also vital. Social media is part of it, but what you need to do in your strategy is know who is going to do what in what event. So who is going to be monitoring social media, who is going to be fronting up to the media if that's appropriate, who is going to be keeping the business running, how you're going to deal with it, what key messages you might have about a particular issue. Now, just a few tips about if somebody complains about you on Twitter or Facebook, what to do. So how you deal with negative comments, because that is one of the biggest fears of businesses, that if they open themselves up on social media, people can complain about them. So what you need to do is you need to respond, but don't do it in anger. Don't think, oh my God, they're rubbish, type. Because if you do that, you're going to possibly, where's Suzanne, write something libelous, or it will be libelous, it won't be slanderous, but you may well put something up that you really shouldn't have posted just because you're so pissed off. Don't delete the negative comments, because then you can be accused of censorship. You need to, you need to leave it up there so that people can see it, but then they can also then see your response. So and your response will be very, very beautifully crafted. Be constructive. So don't write, make sure that whatever you say for me, somebody had complained that one of the training courses that we run media training courses, wasn't very good, or they hadn't got enough out of it, or they didn't have enough practical exercises or something, and they put that on Twitter. I would want to be responding with a very constructive help and advice about what they could do. Do we offer them a one-to-one session? Do we talk to them individually? So be constructive in your response. Don't be abusive either. That's complete no-no, because that will just be retweeted or everywhere, and it'll be a nightmare. And if necessary, take the discussion offline. So if somebody is complaining about you, you need to be saying, actually, why don't we talk about this? Email me, here's our phone number. I want to talk to you, I want to help you, but not in this public forum, but privately. And also what you need to be able to do is to know when you just stop responding. So for example, I had a case where I used to do a PR tip every day on Twitter. I gave up because I got to about 300 and I was kind of like, God, start again with more tips. But I'd done a tip, something about along the lines of, journalists will make things up, because they do. I'm a journalist. I used to make things up when I was on newspapers. You just do. And this was a journalist responding, basically, who was saying, no, we don't, you're talking rubbish. So I kind of gave a very constructive response back, and I can't remember what I said because it was a little while ago, but sort of along the lines of, my experience this, and I looked this guy up, and he'd been a journalist for about 5 minutes, and so clearly hadn't been up into the realms where you did have to make things up. So I responded back. He responded by making kind of personal abuse. I responded back. He responded back. And I just suddenly thought, every time, he had something like 100 followers, I had like 1,000 or something. So I was thinking, every time he responds back, people in my Twitter feed are seeing 1,000 people are seeing somebody basically being abusive about me. And so I just stopped. I stopped responding, and he stopped responding back, and that was it. That was the end of it. So that, while I'm saying do respond, if it gets to the point where it's really not doing you any benefit, you really need to know when to duck out, basically. And not the negative comment side, but if you are going through an external, not caused by social media crisis, there are things that you can do to make sure that social media doesn't make it any worse, because that's the worst thing you want. First of all, you must be monitoring social media, so you must know what is going on and what's being said about you, and you must respond to it in a factual, accurate, proper way, which we'll talk about in a second. But basically, make sure you know what's being said about you and your brand. Give regular updates about the situation. So say, for example, I did a crisis comms course, which Nikki was on a little while ago, and we had a scenario which was basically a huge crisis at Wisley RHS, and in that we were basically saying what you need to do is keep the public informed about what's going on. So use social media to keep the public informed about what is going on with the business, what the state of play is. So that they're not getting information from other people, because essentially what the public want and what journalists want is information about what's happening if something's going wrong. And if you don't tell them, somebody else might be guessing. And that guess could be completely wrong, it could be totally critical. So what you need to do is be very factual and give that response, so there's no speculation which is going to be worse for you. As I said before, everything should be constructive, everything should be factual, so that people know the truth, essentially. Make sure that everything that goes out is accurate and approved. So the last thing you want is, if you've got a business, is to basically get the intern to deal with social media and do the monitoring, because they won't know what your key messages are about the particular situation you're in. You need to have very clear messages going out from your business. As Dee said, everything needs to be kind of aligned. Is that the right word? And So you need somebody senior to be doing that monitoring and not doing the monitoring particularly, but approving the responses that go out, so that it's not just sort of scattergun a little bit, because that could be even worse, basically. And make sure that you coordinate your website and social media, so that what goes out on social media feeds into your website, and what's on your website feeds into social media, so they're all kind of aligned. So if you've sent out a press release, make sure that you post it onto Twitter or Facebook. If you've got a statement on your website about what's happening, make sure it's posted on Twitter and Facebook. Just keep everything together and use all the resources online to keep people informed about what's going on. And the great thing about all this is that you're in control. Essentially, you're not relying on the media or journalists or some local website or sort of business forum to give your information for you. You can get it out there completely widely to everyone. I know that say something was going wrong with the business and they sent me a press release, and we're a weekly newspaper, you might think, well, do I really want to run that? It's a bit boring, really. Actually, no, Spike. Just used to have a Spike in the newsroom. And you wouldn't run it. So you're totally reliant. If you're relying on the media to get your messages out, you're reliant on some editor thinking it's worth running that story. With social media, you're not. You're in control of what goes out. So it's a really useful tool in crisis communications. My big message to you all would be prepare. Make sure you're prepared and you're ready to go with social media as soon as something goes wrong, because you don't want to be thinking about it after it's gone wrong. You've got to anticipate, and you've got to have your policies in place and your accounts activated. And I think that's it.